History is often told in chapters. Chapter 1, the First World War. Chapter 2, the Great Depression. Chapter 3, the Second World War. We treat them like separate books on a shelf. But history isn't a library, it's a river. Between 1914 and 1945, the world didn't experience two wars. It experienced one continuous explosion of human violence that never truly stopped. It was a 30-year struggle for the soul of the modern world. In this film, we are going to look at the Long War. This is the story of how the old world died and how our world was born in blood. To understand the end, we must understand the beginning. In the summer of 1914, Europe was the center of the universe. It was the Belle Époque, the beautiful era. Science was conquering disease. Electricity was lighting up cities. People believed that a major war was impossible because the world was too connected by trade. But Europe was a house of cards. It was ruled by three cousins: King George V of England, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. They wrote letters to each other. They attended the same weddings, yet they were arming their nations to the teeth. Everyone was afraid of everyone else. Germany feared being surrounded. France wanted revenge for a lost war 40 years prior. Russia wanted to protect its Slavic brothers in the Balkans. It was a giant trap. All it needed was a trigger. Sarajevo, June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is visiting a city that hates his empire. A group of young Serbian nationalists, the Black Hand, is waiting. The first assassin fails. The second assassin loses his nerve. 2 shots. One kills the Archduke. 1 kills his wife, Sophie. Princip didn't know it, but he had just ended the 19th century. Within 30 days, because of those alliances we mentioned, every major power in Europe was at war. The domino effect had begun. They went to war laughing. In London, Berlin, and Paris, young men joined the army because they were bored. They thought it would be a grand adventure. They thought they'd be home by Christmas. But the world had changed while they weren't looking. The generals were still thinking about Napoleon and horses, but the factories were now building machine guns. When the German army met the French and British armies, they realized something terrifying. If you stand up, you die. So, they dug. They dug 400 miles of trenches from the Swiss border to the North Sea. This became the Western Front, a wound in the earth that would not heal for 4 long years. By 1915, the adventure was over. The Western Front had become a machine designed to turn young men into ghosts. The space between the trenches was known as no man's land, a graveyard of mud, craters, and tangled barbed wire. Commanders, still using 19th century tactics, ordered thousands of men to charge directly into machine gun fire. At the Battle of the Somme, the British Army lost nearly 20,000 men in a single day. To break the deadlock, humans turned to science for more efficient ways to kill. The tank was born, a steel monster designed to crush wire and ignore bullets. Then came the Knights of the Sky. Airplanes, once fragile toys, were now mounted with guns, turning the clouds into a new battlefield. But the most terrifying innovation wasn't made of steel. It was chemical. In April 1915, a strange, yellow-green cloud drifted toward the French lines at Ypres. It looked like a mist, but it felt like fire. Chlorine gas. It dissolved the lungs. It blinded the eyes. For the first time in history, the very air you breathed was the enemy. This was total war, where the goal wasn't just to defeat the enemy's army, but to destroy their will to exist. While the soldiers died in the mud, the people at home began to starve. The British Navy blocked the North Sea, preventing food from reaching Germany. In response, German U-boats, submarines, began sinking any ship headed for Britain. The war was no longer just on the front lines. It was in the grocery stores and on the kitchen tables of every family in Europe. In the East, the Russian Empire was cracking. Their army was massive but poorly equipped. Some soldiers were sent to the front without rifles, told to wait for a comrade to die so they could pick up his gun. By 1917, the Russian people had had enough. Hunger and defeat led to a revolution. The Tsar, the absolute ruler of Russia, was forced to abdicate. But the chaos didn't stop there. In a stroke of genius, or madness, Germany helped transport a radical revolutionary named Vladimir Lenin back into Russia. They hoped he would cause enough trouble to knock Russia out of the war. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power. Russia signed a peace treaty and exited the war. Germany breathed a sigh of relief. They could now move all their eastern armies to the west for one final, crushing blow. But they forgot one thing. While Russia was leaving the stage, a new giant was finally putting on its boots. For 3 years, the United States had watched the carnage from across the Atlantic. President Woodrow Wilson had campaigned on the promise to keep us out of the war. Germany, desperate to starve Britain into submission, declared unrestricted submarine warfare. They would sink any ship, even neutral American ones. Then came the final straw, the Zimmermann telegram. Germany sent a secret message to Mexico, promising them Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if they attacked the United States. The American entry changed the math of the war. Germany was exhausted. Britain and France were bled dry. But America was fresh. They were the world's greatest industrial power, and they began sending 10,000 fresh soldiers to France every single day. These doughboys weren't battle-hardened, but they brought something the exhausted Europeans had lost: hope, and an endless supply of canned food, ammunition, and steel. The German high command realized that the clock was now ticking. They had to win the war now, or they would be crushed by the sheer weight of American industry. In the spring of 1918, Germany threw the Hail Mary of history. They took every soldier they had left and launched a massive attack. They used new stormtrooper tactics, small, elite groups that bypassed trenches to create chaos in the rear. They got so close to Paris that they could hit the city with giant Paris guns from 75 miles away. The Allies were on the brink of total collapse. But the Germans had a problem. They were starving. There are accounts of German soldiers breaking into British supply lines, and instead of continuing the attack, they stopped to eat. They found white bread, chocolate, and butter, things they hadn't seen in years. In that moment, the German soldier realized he had been lied to. His leaders said the Allies were starving too. They weren't. The German offensive ran out of steam. They had the will, but they didn't have the calories. In August 1918, the Allies launched the 100 Days Offensive. The German line didn't just bend, it snapped. By November, Germany was in a state of total revolution. The Navy mutinied. The Kaiser fled to the Netherlands. The war was over, but not with a surrender in the field. Instead, it was an armistice. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the guns went silent. For the first time in 4 years, a man could stand up in a trench and not be shot in the head. But the silence was deceptive. The world gathered at the Palace of Versailles in 1919 to draft the peace. The Big Three, the US, Britain, and France, had very different ideas. President Wilson wanted a League of Nations to prevent future wars. But the French wanted blood. They forced Germany to sign the War Guilt Clause, accepting total responsibility for every death in the war. They stripped Germany of its coal mines, its colonies, and its pride. They slapped them with a debt that would take 90 years to pay off. Many German soldiers felt they hadn't been defeated. They felt they had been stabbed in the back by politicians at home. The Treaty of Versailles didn't end the war, it simply paused it. As one British diplomat said as he walked out of the hall, "We have a peace treaty that has the face of a war." For a few years in the 1920s, it looked like the world might actually recover. This was the era of jazz, of Art Deco, and of the first global celebrities. In America, the economy was screaming forward. In Berlin, the culture was the most progressive in the world, but the foundations were made of sand. Germany was paying its war debts by printing money that didn't exist. This led to hyperinflation. By 1923, a single US dollar was worth 4.2 trillion German marks. When money becomes worthless, society becomes desperate. And in that desperation, a new kind of leader emerged, the fascist. In Italy, Benito Mussolini marched on Rome and declared himself Il Duce. He promised order, strength, and a return to the glory of the Roman Empire. He was the blueprint for what was coming next. October 29, 1929, got the Wall Street crash. It started in America, but because the world was now a global marketplace, the shockwaves hit everywhere. American banks stopped lending to Europe. German factories closed. Millions of men were suddenly on the streets with nothing to do but get angry. This was the moment Adolf Hitler had been waiting for. But in the Great Depression, his message started to make sense to the middle class. He didn't talk about complex economics. He talked about the vote. He talked about blood and soil. The math was simple. As unemployment went up, the Nazi vote went up. Within months, he burned the parliament building, banned all other parties, and declared himself the Führer. Hitler wasn't just a leader, he was a choreographer. He turned politics into a religion. He began a massive public works project, building the Autobahn. But secretly, he was doing something forbidden. He was rebuilding the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, and the army, the Wehrmacht. The world watched, but did nothing. Britain and France were still haunted by the ghosts of 1914. They couldn't bear the thought of another generation of men dying in the mud. This led to appeasement. Every time Hitler broke a rule, he waited to see if the Allies would fight. He returned waving a piece of paper, claiming he had achieved peace for our time. He hadn't. He had only bought Hitler more time to prepare. The Long War was no longer a European problem. By the summer of 1939, the countdown had reached zero. The masks were off. The peace was over. The sequel to the Great War was about to begin, and it would make the First War look like a rehearsal. On September 1st, 1939, the world as humanity knew it ended. Hitler unleashed Blitzkrieg, lightning war. This wasn't the slow, stagnant crawl of 1914. This was a symphony of destruction. Tanks, motorized infantry, and dive bombers working in perfect, terrifying synchronization. Poland fell in weeks, but the real shock came in May 1940. The French army, considered the best in the world, was bypassed and broken in just 6 weeks. The British were chased off the continent at Dunkirk, leaving their tanks and trucks rusting on the beaches. Britain stood alone, led by a man who had been a cabinet minister during the First War, Winston Churchill. As German planes began raining fire on London in the Blitz, the world held its breath. Was this the end of democracy? Hitler's greatest ambition was never the West, it was the East. He wanted Lebensraum, living space, and the total destruction of communism. On June 22, 1941, he made the biggest gamble in military history. He invaded the Soviet Union with 3 million men. It was the largest invasion in human history, a front line stretching 1,800 miles. At first, the Soviets collapsed. Millions were taken prisoner. But as the German army pushed deeper, they met two enemies they weren't prepared for: the infinite supply of Soviet soldiers and the Russian winter. The war in the East became a war of extermination. This wasn't just about territory, it was about the survival of races. It was here, in the shadow of the Eastern Front, that the Holocaust began to move from a policy of persecution to a factory-line system of mass murder. While Europe was drowning in blood, the Pacific was about to explode. Japan, seeking to build an empire of its own, saw the United States as the only obstacle. December 7, 1941, got a Sunday morning in Hawaii. The Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor was designed to cripple the American fleet in a single blow. It was a tactical masterpiece, but a strategic suicide. Hitler, tied to Japan by a treaty, declared war on the United States just days later. He thought America was weak, a mongrel nation of businessmen. He forgot the lesson of 1917. By declaring war on America, he had invited the most powerful industrial machine in history to focus entirely on his destruction. The Long War was no longer a series of regional conflicts. It was now truly a world war. From the jungles of Burma to the deserts of North Africa and the frozen streets of Stalingrad, the entire planet was now a battlefield. By 1943, the German machine began to crack. At a city called Stalingrad, an entire German army was surrounded and starved into surrender. It was the bloodiest battle in human history. The invincible Wehrmacht was now in full retreat. In the Pacific, the Americans were island hopping, winning brutal battles at Midway and Guadalcanal. The Japanese Empire, once expanding like a wildfire, was being pushed back toward its home islands. Then came the final door kick. June 6, 1944. D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin had finally coordinated their grip. The Allies were squeezing Germany from the west, the south, and the east. The 1,000-year Reich was being ground into dust in less than 12 years. As the Allies pushed into Germany, They discovered the true extent of the darkness, the Holocaust. 6 million Jews and millions of others, Roma, Slavs, the disabled, had been murdered in a systematic, industrial genocide. This was the ultimate conclusion of the Long War. When you treat humans as industrial statistics, this is the result. It wasn't just a war for territory anymore. It was a war for the definition of humanity. In April 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in a hole in the ground, while 12-year-old boys and 60-year-old men died in the streets of Berlin to protect him. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. But in the Pacific, the flame refused to go out. The Japanese refused to surrender. The Americans feared that an invasion of Japan would cost 1 million more lives. So, they turned to the ultimate weapon. In a single flash of light over Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, the nature of war changed forever. A single bomb could now do the work of 1,000 planes. The Long War, which started with horse-drawn carriages and bolt-action rifles in 1914, ended in 1945 with the splitting of the atom. The Long War lasted 30 years. It left 80 million people dead. It ended the era of empires and gave birth to the Cold War. But it also taught us something. Out of the ashes, we built the United Nations. We created a world where, for the first time in history, the great powers have not fought each other for 80 years. We live in the house that 1945 built. We walk the streets that were once rubble. The ghosts of the Long War are still with us, whispering a single warning, that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the constant, difficult work of preventing the fuse from being lit again.